Hello, friends, welcome again. Friends, when we were children, we used to listen to some stories from our grandparents or from our parents, and we used to enjoy the stories. Unknowingly, we used to learn some moral lessons sometimes from the stories. We enjoyed them, yes or no? Friends, today, as the students of literature, now we are reading and we are studying short stories. And in this lecture, friends, today we want to understand what a short story as a form of literature is. We are going to discuss the definition of a short story. Will also discuss some important features or elements of the short story and how the short story as a form of literature developed in English language. Friends, we know that the short story is a popular form of literature in the modern times. However, it is not a new form. The short story is an ancient form of expression in the whole history of human civilization. If you examine the history, these stories, they were existing in almost all cultures in all countries. We have heard the stories from our grandfathers or grandmothers when we were children. You must have heard the stories of Arabian Nights, or some must have heard the stories of Ali Baba Chalis Chor, and we also listened to the stories of Panchatantra, of the lion, the fox, the crow, and all. And these stories were written in the ancient times. Friends, let's begin with the definition of short story. Short story is a type of form of literature. It is a brief fictional prose narrative. Friends, try to understand this phrase. Fictional prose narrative. Fictional means something which is imaginative. Prose, that means it is written in prose style, not in poetic style. And narrative means here the story is narrated. Okay, it is a brief means short, fictional prose narrative which is shorter than a novel. If you compare a short story with a novel, then the short story is much shorter than a novel, and it usually deals with only a few characters and can be read in one single sitting. A short story is so much short that you can finish the reading of this story in one single sitting. You do not need to devote much time to read such stories. They are hardly written in 5, 6, or 7 pages. So, this is the definition of a short story. From this definition, what we understand is that short stories, they are imaginative by nature. Much of imagination is found in the stories. Okay, imagination means kalpana. Like when we used to listen to the stories of Ali Baba or Arabian Nights and all, they are imagination. Okay, so short story is full of imagination, but they are imaginative prose narrative, written in prose style and narrated. The story is narrated, and it is short in length, and there are very few characters. So, friends, after understanding this definition, if you want to understand the short story as a form in detail, let's now compare first of all short story with the novel. The short story is quite different from the novel. Novel, we know, is a very long narrative, whereas the short story is very short in length, hardly 5 to 10 pages. Okay, the novels are written in 200, 300, 500 pages. But on the other hand, a story finishes within 5 or 10 pages. Novel has a number of characters, whereas the short story has a very few characters. Why? Because the short story has to be short and the scope is limited here, so not too many characters are allowed here. Okay, but the novel is longer in comparison to the short story. That's why novel, you have the freedom to use so many characters to produce to express your ideas. So, short story has a few characters, novels have a large number of characters. Short stories deal with one single idea, and on the other hand, novel deals with so many themes or so many ideas. In short story, there is only one single theme. Theme means the central idea. In short story, one central idea is presented by the author. In novel, many ideas, many themes go side by side in this work of art. Okay, in short story, they have only one main plot and no subplots. But in novel, there is one main plot, and side by side to support and develop that main plot, two or three more stories are going on together in a parallel manner. In a short story, there is only one story, which is the main plot. Okay, in short story, because it is short, that's why only few actions are presented. In novel, a series of actions, hundreds of actions are presented in the novel, and the short story is set at one or maximum two places. I mean, the places which are presented in the short story cannot be more than two. Okay, but in novel, so many different places are presented. So, setting, they have a larger scope in novel. As far as setting in short story is concerned, they do not have much freedom. Only one or two places are presented. So, friends, this was a kind of comparison between the short story and the novel. Now, friends, let's start discussing the important elements of short story. Elements means features, means characteristics. What are the important characteristics of a short story? Number one, as we discussed earlier while discussing the definition of the novel, number one, it is always short in length. And the short stories, it is said, are generally written in 2000 to 6000 words. Now, that doesn't mean that there is a watertight, there is a kind of fixed number of words given to you. Sometimes some authors write the stories in more than 6000 words, sometimes 8 or sometimes 10,000 words also. But this is a general idea. Most of the critics believe that the short story must be finished between 2000 to 6000 words. Second important element of a short story is single plot. Plot means the arrangement of events, means a story. The story which is presented is a single story. Here, the writer does not have the freedom to use subplots with the main plot. Here, one main plot, one main story moves right from the beginning to the end. And this plot has these different, you can say, different parts: beginning, then rising action, then climax, then falling action, and end. Okay, it is a kind of a pyramid structure: beginning, okay, then rising action, on the top climax, then falling action, and the end. So these are the important parts of plot. The main story and the major characters and the main idea, theme, they are always expressed in the beginning of the plot, in the beginning of the story. Then tension begins, okay, as you read it more and more, tension begins, the conflict is presented, and that is called the rising action. The conflict reaches its culmination, ultimate point, that is the climax, then the falling action, and the end. So these are the parts of single plot or the main plot. Third important characteristic of each and every short story is that they have limited number of characters. Hardly 2 to 6 characters are presented in the stories. Why? Because they are short stories, that's why not more characters are presented here. Dialogues are also important in short stories. Why? Because these dialogues which are spoken by the characters, they do two things at the same time. Number one, through dialogues the characters are developed in the story. And number two, dialogues give the dramatic touch to the story. Not only this, because there are dialogues, they give realistic touch also, and these dialogues are used by the authors to develop the story, to develop the plot and the characters. So dialogues are important in the short stories. Fifth characteristic of a short story is setting. Friends, setting means time and place. Some time is presented in the story and some place is presented in the story. But because it is very short, so limited time is presented and limited places are presented. I mean, if the author presents too many places, say for example, the first event takes place in Chennai, second event takes place in Ahmedabad, third event takes place in Delhi, fourth in Mumbai, fifth in Kerala, then if this goes on, then it creates so many confusion in the minds of the readers. So not too many places are presented. The whole story is finished at one single place or maximum two places. Okay. So remember, setting is also an important element of a short story. Sixth characteristic of a short story is the narrative method. Now, as far as the presentation is concerned, the authors can narrate the story in three different methods: first person narration, second person narration, and the third person narration. Sometimes the character himself narrates the story. Okay? Character who is an important character in the story, that character himself, we feel as if the character himself is telling the story. Okay, and he uses the words, the pronouns like I and we. So this is the first person narration. Second person narration, which is not so much popular among the readers and the writers, and that is in which the the pronoun you is mostly used, but it is not advisable and it is not so much popular also in literature. But the third person narration, which is the most popular method, is the method in which the author himself tells us the story. Okay, and the author uses the pronouns like he, she, it, and all. Okay, here in third person narration, we develop an intimacy with the author. In the first person narration, we develop an intimacy with the character. So, the first person and the third person both are popular among the short story writers. That is the sixth element of a short story. Seventh element is, which is the most important element, is the theme. Theme means the central idea. How theme is important in literature. Friends, I have uploaded one more video on the importance of theme in literature. After this, if you want, you can watch it to understand it in detail. But theme, the central idea, is very important in every work of art. No short story can exist without any theme. The short story can be written on the theme of friendship, say for example. It can be written on the theme of college days. It can be written on the theme of love for nature. It can be written on the theme of war. Okay, there are so many topics, on which there are so many ideas on which the short story writers write the stories. But theme is very important in every short story. So, friends, these are some 7 important elements of the short stories. Now, friends, very speedily, let's have a look at the development of short stories in English literature. As I told you in the beginning, short stories, they were existing in the ancient times also, but they were existing mostly in oral tradition. Why? Because in those times there was no pen and paper, and that's why people used to listen to the stories, they memorized the stories, and they used to pass the stories on to the next generation. So, short stories in the very ancient times were existing in oral tradition. The stories of Panchatantra in Sanskrit literature written by Vishnu Sharma, they were written in the 2nd and 3rd century. And the stories of Hitopadesha, they were again written in Sanskrit language, written by Narayan Pandit. They were written during the 12th century. So in Sanskrit literature, these short stories were existing, during the 2nd and 3rd century onwards. We must have heard the stories of Arabian Nights. Okay, these stories became popular from 8th to 14th century in Europe. And Geoffrey Chaucer, was an English poet who has also written stories in poetic form during the 14th century. Okay, so as far as English literature is concerned, you can say 14th century was the beginning of stories, but still they were not the stories in the form that we see today. Chaucer wrote the stories in poetic form. Okay, but short story as a serious form of English literature in prose language came into existence during the 18th and 19th century. The brothers Grimm published their first volume of fairy tales in 1812. Edgar Allan Poe also revealed his tales of mystery and Gothic fiction between 1832 and 1849. He declared the short story as superior to the novel because it could be read in one single sitting. Okay, so Edgar Allan Poe, a short story writer, he said that short stories are better, they are superior to the novels. Why? Because the novels they take so much time in reading, but on the other hand, short story can be finished in one single sitting. Many literary critics they credit Russian author and playwright Anton Chekhov as the founder of the modern short story. Okay? Why? Because he published short stories during the late 1800s. So Anton Chekhov, you can say, was also one of the founders of this form of literature. So friends, here I just gave you a cursory idea about how the stories existed in the ancient times and how the stories came into existence in the modern times. Friends, here I end this video. If you have any doubts, questions or comments, please write to me in the comment section of this channel. Thank you. Thank you very much.